My name is Mary, and I'm one of the tellers, along with my teller friends Betty and Fred. And we represent our organization, the Storytellers of San Diego. So that being said, I want to get started. And our first teller up today is Fred Laskowski. He enjoys telling stories from around the world. And today he brought a variety of tales to share with all of us. So let's welcome Fred.
Thank you. Speaking of whispers in the wind, I was just hiking in Mission Trails Park yesterday up the Oak Creek Canyon that goes up out of the dam. And it was definitely a nice breezy day whispering in the wind. So the first story I'm going to tell you today is many cultures around the world have a Cinderella story, and you can find them in all different cultures in all different countries. And I'm going to tell you a Cinderella story that originated with the Algonquian tribe here in the States before white influence. So it's been around a while, and the Algonquian tribe were around the Great Lakes. So it goes like this. So once long ago, there was a village by the shores of Lake Ontario. Off from the other wigwams of this village stood one great huge wigwam. Painted on its sides were pictures of the sun and the moon, and the stars and the plants and the trees and the animals. And inside this wigwam, there was said to live a very great, rich, powerful, and supposedly handsome, invisible being. Of course, no one could see him, except his sister, who lived there too. Many women wanted to marry this invisible being, but his sister said, only the one who can see him can marry him. Now, in this village, there lived a poor man who had 3 daughters. The 2 older daughters were cruel and hard-hearted, and they made their youngest sister sit by the fire and feed the flames. And when the burning branches popped, the sparks fell on her, and so in time, her hands became burnt and scarred. Her arms, too, became rough and scarred. Even her face was marked by the fire, and her beautiful long black hair hung ragged and charred. And those 2 older sisters, they laughed at her, saying, "Ha! You're ugly, you rough-faced girl." And they made her life very lonely and miserable indeed. One day, these 2 older sisters went to their father and said, "Father, give us some pretty beaded moccasins. Give us some new buckskin dresses. Give us some necklaces. We're going to marry the invisible being." And so their father gave them these things. Dressed in their finest, the 2 sisters marched through the village. All the people pointed and stared. "Look at those beautiful girls. Surely they shall marry the invisible being." And if those 2 sisters were proud and hard-hearted before, they were even prouder now. They walked haughtily through the village. And at last they came to the wigwam of the invisible being, and there was his sister waiting. "Why have you come?" "We're here to marry the invisible being. That's why we've come." "If you want to marry my brother, you have to have seen him. Tell me, have you seen my brother, the invisible being?" "Of course we've seen him. Can't you see how pretty we are? Can't you see the beautiful clothes we wear? Oh, anyone can tell that we've truly seen the invisible being." "All right. If you think you've seen him, then tell me, what's his bow made of?" Suddenly her voice was as strong as thunder, swift as lightning. The girls stammered back. His bow? We know." But turning desperately toward each other, they whispered, "What shall we say? Let's say it's the oak tree." And so they said, "It's the great oak tree." No. Oh, she could see how they lied. But she went on. "If you think you've seen my brother, the invisible being, then what's the runner of his sled made of?" And they stammered back again, and turning Desperately toward each other again, they whispered and wondered, what shall we say? Let's say it's the green willow branch. No, said the sister when she heard. No, you have not seen my brother. Now go home. We've seen him. Just test us fairly. Don't ask us all these silly questions. All right, then come with me. And she led the two sisters back to the great wigwam, and she sat them in the seats that are furthest from the entrance. These are the guest seats. Soon they heard footsteps coming along the path. Then something stepped inside. Though they heard breathing, the two girls couldn't see a thing. And suddenly, a great bow and a beaded quiver of arrows appeared in the air and were set down. And though those two girls sat there all the rest of the night, they still never saw a thing more. And in the morning, they had to go home, ashamed. The next day, the rough-faced girl approached her father. Father, may I please have some beads? May I please have a new buckskin dress and some pretty beaded moccasins? I'm going to marry the invisible being, for wherever I look, I see his face. But her father sighed. I'm sorry, daughter, I have no beads left for you, only some little broken shells. I have no buckskin dress, and as for moccasins, all I have is my old, worn, cracked, and stretched out pair from last year, and I'm sure they're much too big. It's all right, Father. Whatever you could spare, I can use. And then she took dried reeds, and with the little broken shells, she strung a necklace. She stripped birch bark from the dead trees and made herself a cap, a dress, and leggings. With a sharp piece of bone, she carved into the bark pictures of the sun and the moon and the stars, and the plants and the trees and the animals. She went down to the lakeshore, and she soaked the moccasins in the water until they grew soft, and she could mold them to her feet. But they were still too big, and they flapped like duck's feet as she walked. All the people came out of their wigwams. They pointed and stared. Look at that ugly girl. Hey, and they laughed at her clothing. Look at her, she's strange. Hey, go home, you ugly girl. You'll never marry the invisible being. But the rough-faced girl had faith in herself, and she had courage. And so she did not turn back. She just walked right through the village. And as she walked on, she saw the great beauty of the earth and the skies spreading before her. And truly, she alone of all in that village saw in these things this sweet yet awesome face of the invisible being. At last she came to the lakeshore. Just as the sun was beginning to set behind the hills, and the many stars came glittering out like a fiery veil in the darkening sky up above. And there by the water's edge stood the sister of the invisible being, waiting. Now, the sister of the invisible being was a wise woman. When she looked at you, she didn't just see your face or your hair or your clothes. No. When she looked at you, she would look you right in the eye, and she could see all the way down to your heart. And she could see whether you had a good and kind heart or a cold, hard, and cruel one. And when she looked at the rough-faced girl, she could see that though her skin was scarred, her hair ragged, and her clothes strange, she could see that still she had a beautiful, kind heart. And so the sister of the invisible being welcomed her dearly, saying, "Ah, my sister, why have you come?" "I have come to marry the invisible being." "Well, if you want to marry him, you have to have seen him. Have you seen my brother, the invisible being?" "Yes, I have." Then tell me, if you have seen him, what's his bow made of? And the rough-faced girl smiled and said, his bow, why, it is the great curve of the rainbow. Ah, said the sister. Okay, if you have seen my brother, then tell me, what's the runner of his sled made of? And the rough-faced girl, again smiling, looked up into the sky and said, the runner of his sled, why, it is the spirit road, the Milky Way of stars that spreads across the sky. Ah, said the sister in wonder and delight, you have seen him. Come with me. And taking the rough-faced girl by the hand, she led her back to the great wigwam. She sat her in the seat closest to the entrance. This is the wife's seat. They heard footsteps coming along the path, closer and closer. And then the entrance flap of the wigwam lifted up, and in stepped the invisible being. And when he saw the rough-faced girl sitting there, he said, at last, we have been found out. And then smiling very kindly, he added, and oh, my sister, but she is beautiful. And the sister said, yes. And then the sister of the invisible being gave to the rough-faced girl a set of beautiful buckskin, the finest of buckskin robes, and a necklace of perfect shells. Go and bathe in the lake, she told her, and dress in these. And so the rough-faced girl, she bathed in the waters of the lake. Suddenly, all the scars from her body vanished, and her skin grew smooth again. Her beautiful long hair grew in as shiny and glossy as a raven's wing. Now, anyone could see that she was indeed beautiful. But the invisible being and his sister, they had seen that from the start. And so finally, the rough-faced girl and the invisible being were married. They lived very happily together for a long time and were never parted. And that's called the rough-faced girl.